Online for Authors. I'm chatting with D.H. Morris, author of The Girl of Many Crowns. Welcome, D.H.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited to have you. I loved this book. But before we get into why I loved this book and all the fun ins and outs, why don't you give my readers, the listeners, just a quick idea of what they're going to find when they open up the cover?
When you open the cover, you're going to find a genealogy chart, and it has the genealogy starting with Charlemagne and several generations, because The Girl of Many Crowns is about the first princess of France, whose father was a grandson of Charlemagne. And you'll also find maps of England and France and Italy and Germany before they were really those countries,
Right.
but how they had been divided by when Charlemagne's empire was divided. And this is Europe giving birth, basically, in the 9th century.
Absolutely.
So it takes you back to the 9th century.
9th century. And we meet this wonderful princess, Judith, and Baldwin Iron Arm, right? And these are the two big characters that we follow throughout. I'm curious though, what made you settle on this story? I'm not one that I normally would not care for French history, European history of this time period. I tend to get very lost and confused as to who's who because everything changes so quickly and I had trouble just keeping up. And I don't think I ever learned any of this in school. And I read this and I often get confused, but I found it fascinating. So I'm curious what brought you to the point that you too found it fascinating enough that you wanted to write about it?
Well, when my husband and I got married a long time ago, um, my aunt, was the family genealogist. And she was looking around for someone who she could pass that job on to in the
Right.
next generation. None of her kids were interested. My husband liked genealogy. I was kind of interested. So for our wedding gift, she gave us this huge book of genealogy and charts. And I noticed that one went back, well, several went back to royalty, but one went back to a princess named Judith. And she appeared 3 times in different areas on my genealogy as the wife of this one, as the wife of this one. And then again, and I thought, this is just within a couple of years. And she was so young. Either everybody named their daughter Judith at that time, and this is a different person.
Right, which happens a lot in
It's a
genealogy.
weird story, or we have it wrong. So I thought, I'm going to make this genealogy right. I'm going to correct it. And instead, the more and more I delved into the story, the more I realized this is a rather extraordinary story. I put it on the back shelf. I had a box of research that I had done on it, but I put it on the back shelf for quite some time, but it kept bothering me. I kept thinking, I wish someone would write this story. I think it's really an interesting story.
Yeah.
And then during COVID, everybody, I think, decided COVID was a good time to do a project. And I thought, I'm getting older. If I don't write it, who will?
Right.
So
Right.
that
Well,
is.
I found this story absolutely fascinating. I'd like to know about the research that you had to do. Like to be able to find this story, we're talking about back in 900, 800, 900 AD. How in the world did you come up with what you came up with? And how much of this is fictional literary license and how much of this is actual facts that you found?
So all the events are actual facts. The literary license comes in. I know she did this, I know she did this, but what did that look like?
Right.
How did that feel? So, of course, that has to be my interpretation. Um, One of the main sources is the monks during that time would often keep an what they called annals. And at the end of each year, they would just write a summary of what had happened during that year in the kingdom. And so there are several annals that actually cover this. Women were hardly ever written about.
Right.
They had
Right.
to do something very unusual, scandalous, in order to be written about. And then when they were no longer scandalous, they stopped writing about them because the monks were mainly interested in what the men were doing, the royal men especially. But I I found a lot of different sources. I was amazed how much is out there. There are also some great English scholars who have written books, but even they focused on Princess Judith's father.
Yeah.
But I was
Yeah.
able to gather all the everything that was going on in the kingdom from those books.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that was wonderful. So I knew what laws were passed each year. I knew what wars were fought, how they were fought. Sometimes they even had um, actual conversations that I was able to draw little bits and pieces and work them in to the book. Um, when you look at, there is a huge collection of maybe 18, 20 volumes. I don't know how many volumes, but it covers from like 300 or 400 AD to about 1500 AD that was written at the time, and it's called the Monumenta Germania Historica, but it's almost all written in Latin. Some of it's in German. I I lived in Germany for 12 years, so I have learned to read German. That helped, but some of the older German was more difficult.
I'm
I
sure.
did have some help with that. Um, Judith's coronation ceremony, the initial one, that is still existent, but it's in Latin.
Mhm.
Luckily, I found online a professor of medieval history from England who had done his best to translate it from Latin to English. So I used that. I That was kind of a mistake. I ordered a lot of books. I ordered a book um, that said it held her coronation ceremony. I was so excited and I got it, and the whole thing was in Latin.
And it was like, doesn't do
so,
you any good, right?
so it didn't do me a lot of good. No. Um, but I was amazed at how much is out there. Unfortunately, we don't study Latin in school anymore. My older brothers, I think my eldest brother took Latin in high school, but by the time I got there, no, it wasn't really offered anymore.
I think Latin was offered in my high school, but you pretty much knew not to take it.
Yeah,
Like in our
you
minds, it
think
was like,
why?
yeah, why do you want a dead language? Let's move on to do something else, right? So, yeah, that's crazy. So, in my review of this, I said that Disney or Pixar or someone definitely needs to turn this into an animated film so that we can show our daughters and granddaughters what strength looks like in the face of adversity. Like of the many things that we see them do, this one would be unbelievably fabulous because I looked at Judith as how strong to do what she did, which was essentially say, I'm going to seek marriage under my own terms and you can't force me anymore. How unusual was that at that time?
She was the first, basically.
Yeah.
it was not heard of. That's why she became infamous in her time. And you see that there are factions. You've got some who are saying, oh, she was a brat, not to obey her father, but she, and others who said, I don't think that she was. I think she was brave doing that. So you've
Yeah.
got the two, and history, I guess, is subjective to a certain extent.
Well, it definitely is because you figure history is written by winners. History is often written by men. History is so you're kind of subject to whoever wrote it down and what their opinion was. Because as much as you try to do a fact, the truth is that you see it from your point of view, and it would be hard to write down nothing but fact without somehow getting your own opinion thrown in there. And so, which was she? I saw her as brave and amazing because, the history will show that she did do what her father asked. Not once, but twice. And both times it didn't work out for her.
And I see this book that as also a story, their story too,
Yes,
Baldwin's story and Judith's
absolutely.
story. At first, when I wrote it for my daughters and granddaughters because I thought you really should know about this ancestor who really was very brave, I thought,
Yeah.
and some of the trials that she went through. And then I gave it to my husband and my son to read when I was during COVID. They were kind of beta readers for it. And they said, well, this isn't Judith's story. This is Baldwin's story. And then I realized actually it's their story.
It's their
It
story.
really is.
Absolutely. And I loved that. And I loved that. I mean, even his character was such that he understood. I mean, he had to have loved her dearly because she gave up a lot, but so did he.
Yeah.
They were both willing to be exiled. They were both willing to be excommunicated. They were both willing to, never see family again. They were both, and it was just, it was a beautiful story. I absolutely loved it. And I think it's interesting that it hasn't been written before.
I thought so too. I kept waiting for someone to write it. I think part of the problem is when I was initially talking to people, they said, no, we want this to, I went to a writers' conference during COVID and it was all online.
Right.
And they were giving us advice. And they said, you don't understand, but the publishers don't want new stories. They want something that is tried and true because they're in
Comfortable.
it to
Yeah.
make money. And so that's why it feels sometimes like we get just a few stories in our whole world that are told over and over and over
Right.
again. How many times can you remake Superman or Robin Hood or
Right.
it's
Right.
over and
Or,
over.
or even Pocahontas, or some
Oh
of the
yeah.
women's stories that those are the only ones you hear of over and over and over and over. And which is why I
But
really do. I mean, like, you need to be pushing this out to people that could do, to me, it would make a amazing animated classic for young girls. I mean,
have you seen the trailer, the video trailer?
no, I haven't.
So it's on YouTube. Um,
I'll look it up
yeah,
and I'll
yeah,
link it. I'll link it, guys, so that you
that
can
would
look
be
at it too.
wonderful.
Yeah.
I got someone to do a video trailer of it, and I think it's beautiful. I think they did a wonderful job with it. I think she would actually be a real Disney
Yes.
princess.
Yes. Yes. And like sometimes we have those that we see that it is someone who was real in history. I just believe that this would be amazing for girls, just like I said, to see strength in adversity when you have to buck the system in order to be strong, but what you're doing is right. It was right for her. And yeah, I was just, and I actually read this book during Women's History Month, which just gave me even more like, oh my gosh, this is the perfect book. So yeah, I'm very much enthralled with your book.
As far as, you know, doing scenes, like if I had a gap of a long time between events that I was sure of,
Yeah.
then I would think, what happened in the country during that time?
Right.
So that
Right.
there's context when we come back to her. So you can understand why she would react or why she would do what she would do. And
Absolutely.
then, or if there was a holiday, I bought a book or two on medieval holidays. How did they celebrate them in the ninth century? Not the 12th century, but the ninth
Right,
century.
right. How did it
And
look?
and
How would it have looked
it
for
was
her? And then you put her in that spot because obviously she would have had a
exactly,
holiday, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
She
I
would have
loved that.
had to have celebrated it. So how would she have celebrated it?
Right. And you
And
also, I'm sure, did a little bit of just in terms of like what general life was like, because we see her doing embroidery with her mother, and we see the little girls playing in the background with a, a nanny of sorts, and we see
yeah,
so there were things that you don't know that she actually sat at the foot of her mother's bed and did embroidery while the little girls were playing, but you can feel pretty confident that something like that happened,
yes.
right?
And the reason why I put the embroidery scene in is because her mother, Ermengarde, was famous for her embroidery.
So yeah.
She was considered kind of a genius at it. So I
Right.
tried
And
wanted to any little tidbit that I found out about the
right.
family, I tried to work in to the book. I my background, I my undergrad was in theater and music. I found that to be really helpful because your approach as an actor or an actress is really to try to put yourself in that character, even if you're playing an evil character.
Right.
And just see what are my motivations? Why, how do I feel at this moment? And so I tried to use that training when I took on any new character, whether
Right.
it
Right.
was the archbishop or the king or whoever, and try and put myself in them, not see it from Judith's standpoint.
And I loved that because the character development was very deep and it felt very real. And you got to know the characters, and you felt like you knew what they were going to do in a given situation based on what you'd seen before. So you did a really good job with that character development. And that's something else that I love when I read a book is really strong, well-developed characters. And you did a beautiful job of that. And I was hooked. Well, I mean, I was hooked from page one. I just I could not stop reading. And like I said, I am actually surprised by that because this isn't a period of history that I normally read and enjoy. I often get so bogged down in the details that I don't understand that are but you did a good enough job keeping me grounded. You let me know what was happening, kind of why it was happening, but you didn't bog me in so many details that I lost the story. And then the characters were done so beautifully. Yeah, this is a beautiful book. This is your first, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
I, at the urging of my daughter, I am, and my husband, I am now partway into writing the prequel. Judith was named for her grandmother,
Right?
Judith, who was the Empress. Um, she was married to Louis the Pious, who was the son of Charlemagne and who inherited his entire empire. So she was his second wife. She has an extraordinary story too. And because I mentioned it also in this first book, um, I think you'll see that some of the same characters will be brought into the second one, and we'll also give some background and context to actually some of the things that had gone on, the Civil
Right.
War. Empress Judith has to pre, uh, protect her son, King Charles, before he's king, because once he's born, his stepbrothers are trying to kill him.
Right. Right. From that point on, he's a dead man walking because they want the kingdom instead of him.
Yes.
Right. Wow, that
Yep.
sounds fantastic. And you said about how far along are you into this book?
just a couple of chapters, but
Yeah.
hopefully by the beginning of next year it'll be done.
Oh, fantastic. Do you have an idea for a name yet?
We are toying with the name The Empress Who Would Not Be Broken.
Oh, I love that.
Do you?
Oh,
Good.
that's a good
That's our
title.
working title if
I
we can't
like it.
come up with anything better.
Yeah, no, I like that title. That definitely has some power to it. I'm curious about your writing life. Like, do you write every day? Do you write it only in your office? Do you like, how does that look when you sit down and you, because you're doing a lot of research too. So like, what does this look like for you?
I absolutely love research. That's
Yeah.
strange, I know, but I
No, I
love
love
reading
research as
about
well.
history.
I love
It's fun.
research as well. So yeah.
I find it fascinating. But so I do a lot of research, and I am a very strange writer, I think. I don't know how other people do it, but I do it very strangely. I try to go to sleep with the thought in mind, I want to envision this scene. I know what happened. Now I want it to come to life in my
Uh-huh.
mind. And sometimes, if I'm lucky, I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I just pull my computer out. Hope my husband doesn't wake up, and because I don't turn on the light, I just open the computer and start writing.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So I try to picture it in my mind, and I found for me that my subconscious sometimes works better, and my conscious seems to be the editor.
Yes.
The subconscious seems to be the creative
Well, and
portion
that's
of
the way
me.
I feel because there are times where all of a sudden I get an idea and I start writing and I'm kind of reading it as it's coming up the page. I'm writing and reading, and my reading self, which is my conscious self, is going, wow. And it's like it's not even talking to the unconscious self that is doing all this creating. The number of times that I've thought to myself, wow, that's amazing. And then think, you just wrote it, but it's like I didn't know that I wrote it. It's a very strange, but I understand what you're saying because, and I think that's where writer's block comes from.
Mhm.
Is our conscious gets in the way of the unconscious and won't give it space to play. And if we don't give
That's
it
right.
space to come out and play, then all we're left with is our conscious thoughts. And my conscious thoughts do a terrible job writing.
Yeah. They're better editors.
Yes. Oh, very good editors because they're more logical and, precision and they'll look. But in terms of like creative, it just doesn't work, which is why I'm a real pantser. I don't I don't sit down and try to write an outline or anything because I don't know where it's going. My mind, yours probably you knew a little more because there's history, so much history involved that we know where, we know she's going to get married and we know and we know and we know. But
Yep,
um, yeah, I think the creative process is an amazing thing,
it is.
the way it works. So do you write daily?
Um, I would not say daily, but I would say that I'm always thinking about it.
Yeah, that's what I tell people too. I'm not a daily writer and I don't have a set time of day that I write.
Exactly.
Um, but when it hits me,
Yeah,
everybody needs to get out of my way, and who knows what else I will do or not do. Um,
exactly. That's
you know,
my process too.
I tell people all the time, I said, when I am in the flow and I have like it's now there and I'm writing, don't expect dinner, don't expect clean clothes, don't expect me to shower, don't expect anything until I've gotten it done. And then I'll be me again for a few days while I'm thinking and perking and whatnot. And then I sit down again. I call myself a binge writer. So
Yeah,
it sounds like maybe
I
you have
think we're very
a,
similar.
yeah. I love that. I love that. Um, so I saw on your website that The Girl of Many Crowns is being released as a audiobook.
Yes.
And so that's
Well, it's right now just they're finishing up the last part of that. So hopefully it will be released within a few weeks.
fantastic. So by the time this episode comes out, we should
It
definitely
could
be
be.
able to see that out there. I'm curious, how was that process, finding the right voice for a narrator?
That that is was challenging.
Yeah.
I, being an actress in a previous life, helped. But doing that many male voices, I'm not up to it as so I just had to do my best, try to distinguish as best I could between the voices. The most difficult one for me, I think, was Louis the Stammerer.
Yeah.
It's not easy to stammer.
No, no. And I find it fascinating that you did the narration yourself. That must have been, how long did that take you?
We worked on it for several months. I went through a company called Audavita, I
Hmm.
think, and what they did is they have all the equipment, I guess, in a studio somewhere. I just had to purchase a microphone and a headset and just connect to my computer, and they had everything set up, and it was interesting. I really enjoyed working with the man who was assigned to my project. He was
Hmm.
very good. His name was Mark, and he's very, very good. He would stop me and say, "Can we do that again?" and pause this time after, at
Right.
this point, or it was amazing how intuitive he was. It was funny though, because he got into the book too,
Yeah.
and at the end he says, "You really brought a tear to my eyes." And I thought,
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
expect that.
I can imagine. I can't imagine trying to switch back and forth with the voices and as you're reading it, getting all the words right, not stumbling. When I read out loud, I love to read and I read out loud and I read out loud all right. But as soon as I have to do it in front of someone, I'm going to stumble. My tongue gets all big in my mouth and everything else. And then you also had to deal with, they're not all words are English. And so you have a lot of pronunciation issues, which I have in my books, which is why I would be terrified to read one of my own as a narrator, because I've got one book that's got Ukrainian words in it. I've got one book that's got German words in it, and I would just butcher them to no end.
The German I could do, the Ukrainian I could not.
Yeah.
The
Well,
French, I most of them, having lived for so long in Europe and traveled, I had a feeling of how to pronounce most of the French. There were a few Italian words I did not know and had to look up. You can
I
look
think
it up online and you
I
can
think
say,
part
what
of it though is
pronunciation?
I have a very American mouth. And there are certain sounds that just will not come out of
True.
this mouth,
That's true.
especially like some of the Ukrainian words from my first book. People will say, well, how do you pronounce, that man's name? And it's like, no idea. Like it's his name. In my mind, I call him Alexandro. I have no idea how they say it because I can't do that with my mouth. There's one
I
woman,
I
her name
totally
is
understand.
yeah, there's one woman whose name is Yetse, and it's Yetse. Well, the YV, I can only go YV, and it's one noise, and I can't do it. Like I cannot make that sound with my mouth. And so it's like I don't know how I would ever read one of my own. I think it's fascinating that you did that.
Well, it was at first, it was funny because the whole idea was that I was going to just do a sample tape. And from that, they were going to use AI to narrate the book using
Oh,
my
okay.
voice.
Yeah.
They it got stalled for several months. They could not get the AI to stammer. So I guess there are things that even the AI
Yeah, I
can't
can't
pronounce.
do. Isn't that interesting? Well, I absolutely love that. So we know what's next is you've got this book coming out. Do you have any other ideas in your head? So when the prequel to The Girl of Many Crowns comes out,
Um,
what do you have like an idea what you're going to work on? Are you planning to continue writing?
I'm taking it one at a time. I do have other books that have been percolating,
Yes.
but I love this story. As I was doing research in the ninth century, I was amazed at how many stories I came across that have never been told that I wish people would reach out and look at and say, "Ooh, this would be a good one to write."
Right, right.
I don't want to write
Absolutely.
them all.
All
There are
right.
other things, other women. I kind of enjoy writing about women's stories. I really would love to write about some brave women from Civil War times or other times. I love
Right.
history.
Love history and love women's stories. Fabulous. Well, good. I didn't want you to disappear after just two books because I'm loving the way you write. You have a wonderful voice. So, hey guys, if you want to keep this conversation going, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. Get on the post, tell us what you liked or loved about this podcast, and you will have a chance to win a copy, a digital copy of The Girl of Many Crowns. So, DH, if someone wanted to get up with you, talk with you, suggest a wonderful story that they think that needs to be told, talk with you about, doing your own audio, that kind of thing, how do they do that? How do they get up with you?
Well, they can certainly go to my website. Not my website, my email.
Yeah.
That's open dhmorris00 at
Okay.
gmail.com.
That'll be in the show notes. DH, thank you so much. And listeners, run out and grab this book. You will not be disappointed. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.